Hello students, welcome again. Students, when we study English literature during the period of Romantic Revival, we come across some important poets like Coleridge, Wordsworth, Keats and Shelley, and in the field of novel, we remember two great names and they are Jane Austen and Sir Walter Scott. In today's video lecture, we want to understand Sir Walter Scott's contribution to English novel, and we are going to analyze Walter Scott as a great historical novelist of English literature. Walter Scott was born in 1771 and died in 1832. Okay, he lived during that period of Romantic Revival, early 19th century, and he has been admired and appreciated by some great thinkers and writers like Goethe, like Pushkin, like Balzac, as one of the founders of the historical novel. All through his life, Sir Walter Scott has written more than 27 novels. Okay, so he was a prolific writer who had been writing so many novels all through his life. Apart from novels, he has also written some poems, but generally, scholars and historians consider him as a greater novelist than a poet. What are his important, very popular novels? You can see on the screen Old Mortality, Rob Roy, The Heart of Midlothian, Ivanhoe, Talisman. These are some of his very important historical novels. Now, before we examine Walter Scott as a historical novelist, first of all, you must be clear about what a historical novel is. Then, as you can see on the screen, historical novel is what? It is written in the form of in narrative style, just like all other novels. Actions are narrated by the novelist, but the difference here is that the background which is presented for the action and the characters who are presented for these actions, they generally come from historical backgrounds. Okay, so historical characters and historical settings and the element of romance, the element of adventure, and element of supernaturalism, a little bit of Gothic novels, all these things combine to make a historical novel. So a historical novel does not talk about the present time. Okay, you compare Walter Scott and Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens expresses the problems, the social issues of his times, of his society. But Walter Scott goes in past and he presents the historical characters in the historical backgrounds. So that is the basic difference between a common novelist and a novelist writing historical novels. Now, you see, it is believed that it was Sir Walter Scott in the beginning of the 19th century who invented this new form. Why? Because we know that during this period of Romantic Revival, the novelists like Jane Austen and Anne Radcliffe, they were very popular, and their novels were mainly feministic kinds of novels where women were projected in the novels, right? So from feminism to feministic kind of novels, Walter Scott gave a new form to the novels by introducing a very serious and masculine type of novels. Okay, his novels are full of romance, full of epic elements, and full of historical background. So that's why we believe that he has not only invented this new form of historical novels, but he popularized and perfected this new genre of novels during the 19th century. George Lukács, one of the important critics, has rightly said about this quality, how he invented this novel. Then he writes that this genre emerges with Scott at this time. At this time means 19th century, the first half of the 19th century. It was during this time that this genre means a type of novel, this new type of novel emerges in the hands of Sir Walter Scott. Scott's novels introduce a new sense of history to English realist novel tradition. There was a common tradition right from 18th century. What tradition in novels? The common tradition of presenting realism in novels. From realism, Scott takes novel to romance. He takes novels to the elements of adventure. He takes novels in the background of history. Okay. Now, before Walter Scott, already there were a few writers who were trying to develop this new genre of novel. Okay, like before Walter Scott, if you read the whole history of English literature, there were several writers like Jane Porter and Horace Walpole. Okay, they tried to produce historical novels, but their novels are considered more like history. Okay, they actually do not present the real air of romance which is necessary in the novels. Why? Because a historical novel is not history. It is different from a history. History tells you about the facts and figures, real facts and figures which happened in past. But a historical novel tells you the facts and figures. At the same time, there he mixes these figures, facts, reality with imagination and with romance. That was missing in the writers like Jane Porter and Horace Walpole before Walter Scott. But as I told you, it was left to Walter Scott to give a new shape to this novel, and he perfected this art of writing historical novels, and that's why he has been considered as the most important and dominant historical novelist of English literature. He has presented the history of so many different cultures, communities, and countries. Like you find the history of Scotland in his novels, you find the history of France and England in his novels. Okay, Daniel Cook, an important historian of English literature, marked these three lines as you can see on the screen. Daniel Cook rightly said that Scott favored historical themes, not only set in Scotland. Scott's themes are historical, okay, but he presents the setting in Scotland, also in England, France, Syria, and so many other places as far back as the 11th century. So, when Scott writes novels, he introduces the past time. Okay, 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, all these medieval ages have been presented by Sir Walter Scott, and not only England, he has represented the history of France, Syria, Scotland, and many more. If you want one example, Ivanhoe is a very popular novel, historical novel written by Sir Walter Scott. Here you find what's the story. Here the story of the clash, the conflict between the Anglo-Saxon British people and the Norman conquerors. When we discussed the origin of English language, if you remember, we discussed about the Norman conquest during the 12th century. So that scenario has been reprojected by Sir Walter Scott in this novel. Okay, so what do we see? We see the history of England of the 12th century in this novel. Not only 12th century, if you read all other novels of Scott, then you find there is another novel, Count Robert of Paris. Here you find the 11th century. In Talisman, you find 12th century. In Castle Dangerous, we find 14th century. Fair Maid of Perth. In this novel, you find 15th century, and this is how in Old Morality you find the history of England during the 17th century. 18th and 19th centuries have also been presented by Sir Walter Scott in his different novels. Okay, so you can say 1000 years of history has been reproduced by Sir Walter Scott in a romantic manner, with his power of imagination. Okay, and that's why he has been considered as an important historical novelist. Okay, now the another question that comes to the mind of the readers, to the mind of the students, is from where did Scott learn or borrow the stories? Okay, then I must say that Scott's interest mainly lies in the traditional ballads. Okay, his themes are taken from the Middle Ages. Okay, to oppose the ideals of French Revolution, he gave a new dimension to this new form of writing. Okay, Michel is a critic. He traces Scott's sources to Chaucer even. Okay, he believed that Scott has taken the kind of setting from the Geoffrey Chaucer's poetry. Okay, and also Middle Ages. Gary Kelly, an important critic, has said that Walter Scott has taken his sources, his stories from even William Shakespeare. He has taken some of his stories from the Bible and other such literary masterpieces. Okay, so these are the sources from where he has taken his historical stories. One important element of historical novels is adventure and romance. Okay, so historical novel, as I told you in the beginning, is a mixture of realism, real past, with adventure and romance, and there he has succeeded well. Churchill has rightly said that Scott has been called the king of romances. In his early life, when Sir Walter Scott was a child, was a young man, in those days he had the habit of reading the stories of adventure and romance. He has read Edmund Spenser, Radcliffe, and Horace Walpole. From all these things, he learnt to present the element of romance and adventure in his novels. And that's the reason why you find the atmosphere full of romance in all his novels. His novels are also known as Waverley novels. Remember these things. Okay. Not only this, Scott has presented the Scottish life in his novels. Okay, the Scottish life and manners, Scottish people, the Scottish belief, the Scottish superstitions, all such things abound in all his novels. Okay, just like Miss Edgeworth is considered as the novelist of the Irish life, Ireland. The life of Ireland has been presented by Miss Edgeworth in her novels. In the same manner, Scott is considered as a Scottish novelist. Why? Because he has presented the Scottish life and manners, superstitions and society presented in his novels. The last important point which makes Scott a great novelist is his great art of characterization. Okay, Scott has been appreciated for this. Why? Because you find a huge range of characters in his novels, because he has written so many novels. I told you, more than 27 novels have been written by him, and in all these novels you can group the characters of Walter Scott in two different categories. One, who are the great heroes, and another group is the group of the common people from low life. Okay, Jane Austen, if you compare, it is rightly said that when we pass from the characters of Walter Scott to the characters of Jane Austen. Now, Jane Austen was a contemporary novelist of Sir Walter Scott. Both lived during the same period. So, when you compare the art of characterization of both these writers, the one thing that you find out is that there is a huge gulf, there is a huge gap between these two authors and their characters. Why? Because in Jane Austen's novels we find drawing rooms. Most of the characters are limited to the family members. Okay, they are either parents, children, and all other family members, servants, and all. Right. So we feel that when we read Walter Scott's Mortality, and then after reading that, when you read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, we feel that we come from a market to a drawing room. Yes or no? So in market you meet so many different kinds of people belonging to different parts, different walks of life. In drawing room you meet your family members. So that is the main difference between Jane Austen and Sir Walter Scott as far as the art of characterization is concerned. As I told you, he has presented two types of characters, both individual and typical characters, but on the one hand we have some great heroes presented in his novels. On the other hand we have some other characters belonging to some very simple life, low life, or humble folks. Okay, just like if you compare Walter Scott with George Eliot and Meredith, we can say that he does not present the characters with that psychological attitude. Okay, his characters are historical characters full of adventure and romance, no psychology as you find in George Eliot and Meredith. His immortal characters, as you can see on the screen, are Jenny Deans, Meg Merrilies, Peter Peebles, and all such characters. Kazemian, an important historian, has said this thing about the art of characterization in Sir Walter Scott's novels. He says that despite the attraction of some impressive figures of rebels, ruined noblemen, and chieftains means the army of the chief, chief of the army, the chieftains, noble people, some rebels, such figures are there, such characters are there in his novels, but it is the ordinary people such as patients, farmers, okay, shopkeepers, housewives, servants, who constitute his richest and most attractive gallery of portraits. So he has presented both the kinds of characters, but readers are more attracted by towards his such characters who are representing the housewives, servants, shopkeepers, and farmers. Okay, so here we come to the end, but at the end, let me tell you, he was indeed a prolific writer who wrote more than 27 novels, and all are historical novels. They are all full of history, facts, figure, and at the same time, romance, imagination, adventure, and supernatural elements, and you find a Gothic touch in all his novels. Okay, we can say that it was Sir Walter Scott who gave birth to this new genre in English literature, which was later on imitated by so many other writers during the 19th and 20th century. Examples are Charles Dickens and William Thackeray. they have also imitated Sir Walter Scott. So here we come to the end. If you have any doubts, do write to me in the comment section of this channel, and if you really liked the video, please do write to me and let me know whether you like these videos or not. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.